Alright, we'll take a look at Unequally Yoked tonight. Blessing 17, welcome to the room. Tonight is the first of a series on marriage that I would like to begin to look at. You know, marriage is a complex area, and we want to focus on the spiritual. And so this is one area that we're going to have to break down into different components. What's interesting about this study, later on, Lord willing, we'll take the time also to look at the moral aspect of marriage after each category, each study. So tonight we'll start with unequally yoked. What does that mean when we read, for example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14? Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. What fellowship have righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion have light with darkness? Okay, what do we think of when we read a verse like this? What's the first thing that usually comes to mind? Anyone? This is a very direct command. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Is this talking about the marriage of a husband and wife? Is that the primary focus of this verse? Be ye not unequally yoked. No, I don't think so, right? Because we know that God speaks in parables, and God is using earthly language to highlight, I believe, something much deeper having to do with what's going on in the church, correct? So I'm going to propose, we'll take a look at unbelievers first of all, and I think this is looking at the unsaved in the church itself, the unsaved in the body of Christ. Matthew chapter 17, verse 17. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation. It's the same word, unbelievers, right? And God there, I believe he is talking to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those who identified corporately with the church at the time when Christ was on earth. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 15. What concord, that is, what agreements, hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? So again, unbelievers, infidel, faithless. I think the picture we're getting there is those, the unsaved in the church itself. Luke chapter 12, verse 46. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him asunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. Today, God is judging Babylon. That's the unbeliever, right? Babylon, the wicked and the church. 1 Corinthians 7:12. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother have a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him. Now, this is another area we'll have to come back to, right, when we start looking at another aspect of marriage. Those, the husband and wife dwelling together and one desiring to leave. Again, we'll see if we can, focus on the spiritual. But there again, I think in the context we see that it is talking about those who identified corporately with the church. A brother having a wife that believeth not. So there again, the unbeliever is the one in the body. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. There again, this is another aspect of marriage that we'll have to consider. But just to stir your minds here a little bit, that the unbelieving, if we focus on the spiritual, it is looking at those in the body of Christ itself. God is primarily concerned, again, I believe, with the church. Even though this language appears to be speaking directly. Rose, hi, welcome. Just getting started with the... oh, no need to apologize, no problem. We're just getting started looking at Unequally Yoked. And I mentioned before that this is the first of a series that I'd like to look at on marriage. Doesn't mean that we'll do them back to back, but what I'd like to do is break down these individual components of marriage into different studies, and then, Lord willing, as we see how the language comes together, we might get a better appreciation for the topic. So, if the unbelieving depart, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. Now, I know we used to look at this language and try to relate it directly to the husband and wife in the house, right? But I think you might begin to see that God there is, even though there might be moral teachings here, but God, I believe, is primarily concerned with what's going on in the church. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17. For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God, and if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not? There's the unbeliever again. Now, can you see why I was proposing that when we read that judgment begins at the house of God, the focus is on the chastisement of the elect. The sun, moon, and stars are darkened, coming into the great tribulation. The two witnesses are killed. Yeah, so when God begins to judge his own people, the unbelievers, we're not looking at those that are outside the church or outside the body. God there again, I believe, is primarily looking at those within the body. So judgment begins with the chastening of the elect. Judgment begins at the house of God. And what shall the end be of them that obey not? Well, those that obey not, that's Babylon. And God brings judgment on her. Today we see this, and it is a total separation, right? God does not repent. So he brings the unsaved in the body, those who do not believe, under the second death. Okay, so that's the unbeliever. Unequally yoked, mixed marriages of believers to the unsaved. And then we begin to see that God looks at a marriage, right? Looking at the church as a family. And so he can refer to those in the church as brother, sister, mother, father, husband, wife. And so there is a marriage that's spiritually looking at the church, where God commands those in the body to forgive each other. So it's the same thing that's in view here, I believe. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 again. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And then we read a verse like Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So who is it that the church or the elect was in bondage to? My wife, your husband? Or is it that they were in bondage to the church, right? The teachings of men, the law. And then we start going back to the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2. Yeah, the traditions, precisely. When the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them. You see, God, I believe, historically, he sets it up so that the children of Israel, the people of God, they were to be separated from the heathen nations. Now, even though within that body itself, within the nation of Israel, not all of them were saved necessarily. This is Cindy, right? Dance with Cats, that's your name, Cindy? There is a fine line with that one. as at the same time we should go out into the world and witness. Okay, you know what? We'll take a look at the moral side of it, and I'm going to raise a series of questions, but I don't think we're concerned a whole lot with a fine line. We simply, patiently, Lord willing, we look at the Bible. We don't want to define this language ourselves. God gives us strict instructions who we should have as friends. Well, again, let's take the time to look at the Bible, the language that we're reading here, because God defines the terms, right? Otherwise, and we might begin to speculate as to what we believe these verses are teaching, and then we separate ourselves from the spiritual. But like I said, we'll come back and analyze, try to look at the moral side of it. But I'll be honest with you, before looking at anything moral, I want to make sure, Lord willing, that I understand how God is actually defining the terms here. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 2, that they were to make no covenant with the heathen nations, right? The people of God, the nation of Israel, they were to be separate from those, from the outside. Well, all right, well, we'll come back to that. Okay, what I mean by speculation, anytime we deviate from the verses, from the Word of God, this is what we're looking at here. Okay, that's the Bible. When we patiently compare, the Bible commands that we compare spiritual with spiritual. So we begin to see that, something that appears to be very obvious, like 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And we might have the tendency, the first thing that we look at is that these verses are dealing with the husband and wife in the marriage. As I mentioned before, that certainly there is moral teaching, but the first thing that we want to look at is how these verses relate to what's going on in the church. So we see that when God is talking about separating the people of Israel, the children of God, from the heathen nations, we read also in Ezra chapter 9 verse 2, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers have been chief in this trespass. Okay, but we'll open for general comments and discussion right after the study. We want to look at these verses, Lord willing, to see how they tie in. We're trying to make an ultimate tie-in there to the language that we read there in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Okay, no problem. So now therefore give not your daughters unto their sons, neither take their daughters unto your sons. So there again, God appears to be drawing a line there between the children of Israel and the heathen nations. They were to be separate. They were not to intermarry, right? They were not to mingle with those from the outside. Nehemiah chapter 13 verse 3. Or is that Nahum? Nehemiah, I believe. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. The mixed multitude. And all we have to do really is go back to the Old Testament, look at the language carefully, and see how God was very concerned about those who would intermarry, right? They would take wives of the daughters of the heathen nations, and then they defile the land. Well, that's not surprising. And then we come into the New Testament where God is dealing with the church, and then the same commands apply, because they were used as examples, right, for our admonition. Now, in this verse here, 26, did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God. What sin did Solomon commit? Why is God mentioning here that Solomon also, he sinned by these things? What can you remember about Solomon? Yeah, precisely, Rose. He went after other gods, right? But who actually drove him to it? Who turned his heart from the Lord? His women, yeah. Solomon, I believe, had what? About 700 wives? Yeah. 700 wives and something like 300 concubines. George, hi, welcome. Oh, yeah. If I remember correctly. Oh, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I can remember, about 700 wives and 300 concubines. Well, it's not a matter of blaming the women. I think the ultimate lesson that, yeah. Do you remember, George, how many wives he had? I think it's about 700, and then somewhere around 300 concubines. Uh, so what happened, I believe, is that God is telling us that the women that actually, he was attracted to, they began to worship other gods, and so now they drove Solomon to do the same thing. So that's how his heart was turned from God. And so there was an issue as to whether or not Solomon was really saved. I believe he was a child of God, but God was using him as a picture of the people of God, a picture of the church, right? And it's kind of interesting that God mentions here in verse 26 that he was beloved of his God. Among many nations was there no king like him. So that appears to be a favorable language among others in the Bible concerning Solomon. Malachi chapter 2 verse 11. Judah have dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah have profaned the holiness of the Lord, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. Strange gods. What do? The heathen nation, the moment they begin to come into the camp of Israel, they start turning their hearts away from God. So can you see why God was very concerned? He did not want them to coexist with the heathen, and all of that. Again, I believe spiritually it was pointing to the fact that there would be a separation in the church itself. George writes, Nahum 3 verse 13. Behold, thy people in the midst of thee, women, the gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies, the fire shall devour thy bars. Yeah, God, in the context of those that are going after other gods, God has a lot to say about bringing judgment on them because they turn the hearts of the people away from God. And that's what I believe happened too in the New Testament church. Slowly on, you begin to have pastors and members are creeping into the body. And what do? They start bringing a false gospel. And it begins to multiply, right? And so they grow into deeper apostasy. And that's the picture I think God is actually drawing when we look at the boundaries that he set for his people in the Old Testament. Genesis chapter 6 verse 1. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them. Now here's an interesting account, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Now, why is it that God brought the flood on the people in the days of Noah? Isn't that the reason? And then we read somewhere else in the same context that the Lord God saw the wickedness of man, that it was great. And so God brought judgment to, he destroyed the earth. But there again, that was a picture of God's judgment on Babylon. Can you see the pattern there, Lord willing? And it all started with mixed marriages. See that? Mixed marriages. So the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And these actually became the men of renown. And I think, if we study that, we'll see that the men of renown, again, is looking at the sun, moon, and stars. Those who rule in the church, in the body, but yet they fall away, right? They begin to embrace a different gospel. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 6, let no man deceive you with vain words. For because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. That's the unbelievers, right? Those who are called, but not necessarily chosen. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 7. Be not ye therefore partakers with them. In other words, don't be unequally yoked. Don't be together. God is calling against the mixed marriages. Verse 11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. One thing we'll look at also is that, you start reading these verses, you would think, well, how in the world can the church exist for about 2,000 years and God would not be concerned? Because all of this, to some degree, not to a high degree, but to some degree, was already in evidence. Don't we read that the wheat and tares were to grow together until the harvest? But yet, already we see that God is very concerned. He is very concerned already about with those that are coming into the church, and they want to bring a different gospel. They want to trouble the body. But God had an appointed time where He would begin to take action. And when is that? When does God decide to take action? And actually weed out the rebels and remove the unbelievers. When does that happen? Anyone? When does God begin to take action? Now we see all these verses, God is calling for a separation already, but we know from the rest of the Bible, yeah, precisely, at the revelation of Christ, come out of her, my people, and we're going to see that in a few minutes. But God, even though the language is there, God is calling for a separation. He is calling for a separation, but at the same time we know that He is sealing the believers, and then He is concerned that the wheat should not be separated from the tares until a specific time. And so when we look at these verses in the light of the whole Bible, we understand that this separation is not immediate. It doesn't come right away. We have to wait for the appointed time. Romans chapter 13, verse 12. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness. Now this command was written some time back, but it was anticipating the separation, right? Separation was to take place after the part out. Genesis chapter 21, verse 10. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. So again, God there is looking into the future, the time when the unsaved in the church would actually be cast out, right? God would bring about a permanent separation. For the time, 1 Peter 4:3, for the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lasciviousness. Now you see, even the believers, those who were sealed, the very fact that they were identified corporately with Babylon, and God is actually, hold on one second. Yeah, I know, you know what that was? A siren going on there. Okay, so God basically, he was looking at the whole church, and then we have Babylon. The believers, they are being sealed, but yet God speaks of them, they too, in the flesh, in the body, not in the spirit, because they've been redeemed, right? Christ paid for their sins. But as far as Babylon as far as being a part of the unclean, right? The body is yet to be redeemed. And so that's why I believe we can read language here where God says, when we walked in lasciviousness. In other verses in the Bible, I think we'll see God speaks of such were some of you. And God had to separate the believers, right? He has to cleanse them. And ultimately, as I said, this finds fulfillment as God begins to, he brings judgment on Babylon. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17, if any man defile, and in verse 16, ye are the temple of God. Who is that talking about? Is that the local church, the local building? Is that the temple of God? Or is it the body itself? Ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. If any man defile the temple of God. Now who are they that defile the temple of God? Who are they that defile the temple of God? Yeah, building not made with hands, and even that, George, I believe is spiritual. When God is talking about a building not made with hands, the one that is made with hands, I believe, is looking to the false prophets. They are trying to establish a city with blood, right? The blood of the martyrs, by bringing in false gospels into the body, and so they fall away. That's how they defile the temple. That's how they kill the body. They kill the two witnesses. And so that would be a building or a temple that is made with hands. The one that is made without hands today would be which? The one that is made without hands. We start looking at New Jerusalem. God taking on the responsibility of feeding the flock, the elect body, precisely. As God is feeding them the pure bread, right? The unleavened bread. Not having to do with the leaven of the Pharisees. Okay, so if any man defile the temple of God. So there it is again. God is calling for a separation in the church. Now let's look at the time, right, when this is actually fulfilled. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 again. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And I said before that the unbelievers are the ones in the church, in the body. Numbers chapter 16, verse 26. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs. I believe this is Dathan and Abiram. Somehow they trouble the body, and then God began to call for a separation. And they were picturing the unsaved in the church. Those who troubled the body, and they brought sin, they brought wickedness. They began to identify with the heathen, and God was very angry with them, and then he destroyed them. And that here in this account, this is a type of God's judgment on Babylon. Verse 17, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, wherefore come out from among them. That's the command. Be ye not unequally yoked. Right? Come out from among them. Among whom? The false prophets, the thieves, the locusts. They've always been a part of the body, but God the Holy Spirit was restraining sin. God was in the midst. So even though there were tares, because God's program was being carried out, he kept a lid on it until tribulation. Then the man of sin is revealed, takes his seat in the temple of God, showing himself to be God. He exalts his throne above the stars of God. That's the tribulation. And then after a short time, Christ is revealed. Come out of her, my people. Now we're looking at how this command is actually fulfilled. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. So there's going to come a time when you have to be separated from the body. Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. Isaiah chapter 48 verse 20. Go ye forth of Babylon. There it is. Flee from the Chaldeans with a voice of singing. Come out, go ye forth, and deliver your soul. Isaiah chapter 52 verse 11. Depart ye, go ye out from thence, touch no unclean thing. Go ye out of the midst of her, be ye clean. But you see again, prior to the separation, the believers were a part of the unclean. They had to be refined. They had to go through the fire. They had to be chastised. And that's the refinement, I believe, that allows God now to declare the elect clean. Not because of anything that they've done, but rather they've always been identified with Christ. They were sealed. But as far as a body that was still lusting after sin, this body had to be redeemed. Matthew chapter 25 verse 6. Now when you look at this verse here, at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh. Isn't that interesting? Go ye out to meet him. The cry comes at midnight, the great tribulation. And already we begin to make preparation, right? Christ is about to be revealed. Go ye out. Out where? Can someone tell me, with this verse here, go ye out to meet him, is this saying that if we are inside the church and the building, that we leave the structure, we leave the institution, and then we go meet Christ outside the building? Is that what this verse is teaching? Yeah, there you go. Go ye out. In other words, God is going to bring about a resurrection. He is going to unseal the Bible so that where he would actually feed his people with knowledge. And that's how they're leaving Babylon. They're not leaving the building. They're leaving Babylon. They're coming out. Go ye out to meet him. Go ye forth of Babylon. Can you see why it's dangerous when we begin to make Babylon the local church, and it becomes a something physical, tangible, and we try to identify, we try to relate to that? That to me, it's simply giving more evidence that we're not looking at the spiritual. We're not seeing how the language of coming out of Babylon has everything to do with God bringing back the captivity of his people. Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 8. Remove out of the midst of Babylon and go forth out of the land of the Chaldeans. Jeremiah 51 verse 6. Flee out of the midst of Babylon. Again, so there's your separation. The command has always been there. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. But because we know that God had to come to a specific time when he would begin to bring about the separation. But until then, the wheat and tares were growing together. Flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. That's salvation. Deliver every man his soul. And this verse, I believe, if you remember Ezekiel 33, where God speaks of the watchman and the trumpet. If the watchman sees the sword come and blows the trumpet, those who hear the sound of the trumpet, they take heed, what happens? They deliver their soul. Same picture, I believe. God gathers them. He brings them out of Babylon. Matthew 24 verse 16. Here's another verse. When you see the abomination of desolation, right? What do? Let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So there's the separation. Jeremiah chapter 51 verse 45. My people, go ye out of the midst of her, and deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of the Lord. And then finally, Revelation chapter 18 verse 4. And I heard Another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people." There it is again. So that if we isolate "come out of her, my people" here from the rest of the Bible, we might easily conclude that, oh, you see, I got to come out of the church. I got to leave the building where the pastors are preaching, because Satan is behind the pulpit. But coming out of Babylon, "come out of her, my people, go ye out of the midst of her." Remove out of the midst of Babylon, go ye out to meet him. Different ways that God, I believe, is painting the same picture. So be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Okay, now this is a short study. I want to try and keep these sessions short, to the point, because as I said, it's a very it's an extended topic, looking at marriage, and so we'll break it up into different pieces, right? And then hopefully by doing that, we might begin to see a larger picture. Let me get the other part. Okay, so the Bible appears to be defining unequally yoked as a spiritual fornication of mixed marriages between God's people and Babylon. God has always called on the elect to be separate from the unclean. However, this appears to find ultimate fulfillment when God judges Babylon today and calls for the elect to come out. Right? Okay. All right. I want to raise a series of questions, because we'll discuss the moral issues related to that verse, to this study. But before I do that, let me go ahead and turn off the recorder here for this session.